92 seconds. That's how long it took for a bridge to collapse during rush hour, plunging 143 vehicles into a river, while drivers watched the road ahead literally disappear beneath the car in front of them. The dashcam footage exists. It's been deleted and reuploaded thousands of times, and once you see it, you'll never trust a bridge the same way again. They teach you about the Titanic, they teach you about the Hindenburg, they teach you about building collapses and plane crashes. But there are engineering failures so catastrophic, so sudden, so utterly preventable that they redefined how we understand structural safety. Failures where the engineers knew, sometimes for years, that catastrophe was inevitable, where calculations proved the structure would fail, where warnings were filed, ignored, and then vindicated in the most horrific way possible. What I'm about to show you aren't accidents. These are 5 engineering disasters ranked not by death toll alone, but by the absolute horror of how people died. The terror of watching a structure fail in real time, the agony of being trapped while rescue is impossible, the nightmare of drowning in darkness while the world above has no idea you're dying. These are disasters measured not just in body counts, but in suffering, in the last moments of consciousness, in the awareness that you're about to die because someone cut a corner. In the next 20 minutes, you'll see footage of a bridge collapsing while people walk across it. You'll hear audio recordings of miners trapped underground writing goodbye letters. You'll read testimony from survivors who watched friends die inches away and couldn't help. You'll discover that in every single case, engineers had calculated the exact failure mode years before it happened. And you'll learn why the person who made the decision to ignore those warnings almost never faces consequences. These 5 disasters killed over 2,000 people combined. But the horror isn't just in the numbers. It's in how they died, knowing someone could have prevented it. Starting with number 5. A disaster where people had 17 seconds to escape a collapsing structure, and dashcam footage captured every second of their final moments. August 14, 2018, 11:36 a.m. The Morandi Bridge in Genoa, Italy, a major highway viaduct carrying the A10 motorway, was packed with morning traffic. Approximately 143 vehicles were on the bridge. The structure had been deteriorating for years. Engineers had filed reports. Inspections had identified critical problems. And on a rainy Tuesday morning during rush hour, a central support tower suddenly collapsed, taking a 650-foot section of roadway with it. The Morandi Bridge was designed by engineer Riccardo Morandi and completed in 1967. It was an innovative design using prestressed concrete cable stays, essentially cables inside concrete that supported the deck. But the design had a fundamental flaw. The cables were susceptible to corrosion from water infiltration, and once corrosion began, it was nearly impossible to detect or repair without dismantling the entire structure. By the early 2000s, engineers inspecting the bridge had identified serious concerns. Water was infiltrating the concrete. The pre-stressed cables showed signs of deterioration. Cracks were visible in multiple locations. In 2016, a detailed engineering report recommended urgent strengthening work and suggested that without intervention, catastrophic failure was possible. The report was filed with Autostrade per l'Italia, the private company operating the bridge. They commissioned additional studies. Those studies confirmed the 2016 findings and added more urgent recommendations. The company began planning maintenance work, but delayed implementation because shutting down a section of the bridge would require traffic diversions that would be expensive and unpopular. Meanwhile, the bridge continued to deteriorate. Local residents reported hearing strange sounds from the structure, metallic groaning, cracking noises. Some people who lived near the bridge towers said they'd noticed the bridge swaying during high winds more than they remembered from years past. On the morning of August 14, 2018, a violent storm hit Genoa. Heavy rain and strong winds. Traffic on the Morandi Bridge was heavy but moving. At 11:35 a.m., witnesses reported hearing a sound like an explosion or thunder. Security cameras and dashcams captured what happened next. A central support tower, Tower 9, suddenly began to collapse. The collapse took approximately 17 seconds from initial failure to complete destruction. In those 17 seconds, 143 vehicles were on the affected section of bridge deck. Drivers had no warning. One moment they were driving on a highway. The next moment, the road ahead was falling into empty space. Dashcam footage from vehicles on the bridge shows the moment of collapse from multiple angles. In one video, you can see the car ahead suddenly drop out of sight. The driver with the dashcam slams on brakes, stopping just feet from the edge of the destroyed roadway. In another angle, you can see vehicles sliding backward as the deck tilts, unable to stop, tumbling into the gap. The section of roadway fell 150 feet to the ground below, landing on railway tracks, warehouses, and the Pulsivera riverbed. Of the 143 vehicles on the bridge, 35 fell with the collapsing deck. 43 people died. Many died on impact when their vehicles hit the ground. But some survived the initial fall, trapped in crushed vehicles, and died over the following hours as rescue workers tried desperately to reach them. The Morandi Bridge collapse created multiple catastrophe sites. The main debris field was on the ground below the bridge, where 35 vehicles had fallen 150 feet. But the horror extended to both sides of the collapse. Drivers on the unaffected sections of the bridge found themselves stranded on a road that simply ended in empty space. Some got out of their vehicles and walked to the edge, looking down at the destruction below, processing the fact that they'd been seconds from death. Several survivors later described the psychological horror of seeing tire marks leading to the edge and disappearing, marks from vehicles that hadn't been able to stop in time. Below in the debris field, rescuers found nightmarish scenes. Vehicles compressed to a fraction of their original size by the impact. Some occupants killed instantly. Others trapped alive in spaces too small for rescuers to access with available equipment. Heavy machinery would be needed to lift concrete slabs, but using heavy machinery risked further collapses that could kill both victims and rescuers. Emergency services received multiple calls from people trapped in vehicles. One woman, later identified as 34-year-old Elena Maestrani, called her husband while trapped in her crushed car. A partial transcript of that call was later released. "I can't move, the car is crushed. I can see light above me, but I can't reach it. My legs, I think my legs are broken. Where are they? Why aren't they here yet? Please tell them to hurry. I'm scared. Tell the children I love them." The call cut off. Elena died before rescue workers could reach her vehicle. Her body was recovered 6 hours after the collapse. Another victim, Giovanni Battaloro, a truck driver, survived the initial impact but was trapped in his cab, which was pinned under a massive concrete slab. Rescue workers could see him and communicate with him, but they couldn't extract him without heavy lifting equipment. Giovanni remained conscious and talking to rescuers for nearly 3 hours. He asked about other victims. He asked rescuers to call his wife. He made jokes to keep morale up while they worked to free him. When heavy equipment finally arrived and began lifting the concrete slab, something shifted. A secondary collapse occurred. The concrete that had been pinning Giovanni's truck shifted and crushed him. He died while rescuers watched, killed by the rescue attempt itself. The psychological impact on first responders was severe. Multiple firefighters and emergency medical personnel required counseling after the disaster. They'd been talking to victims, reassuring them, promising rescue was coming, and then watching them die because the rescue took too long or because the rescue attempt itself caused further collapses. But perhaps the most disturbing element was the video evidence. Dashcam footage from vehicles on the bridge captured the collapse from multiple angles. These videos show normal people going about their day, driving to work, listening to music, talking on phones, and then suddenly falling to their deaths. In one dashcam video that went viral before being repeatedly removed and reuploaded, you can see the moment of collapse from inside a vehicle that fell. The video shows a normal highway view through the windshield. Then suddenly the car ahead tilts downward and disappears. The vehicle with the dashcam follows, and the camera captures approximately 2 seconds of freefall, showing the ground rushing up, other vehicles tumbling through the air, the realization that there's no escape. The video ends on impact. The people in that vehicle did not survive. Stop for a moment and imagine that commute. You're driving to work, normal Tuesday morning. Traffic is heavy but moving. You're thinking about your day, maybe listening to music, maybe on a phone call. And then the car ahead of you just drops out of sight. You slam on your brakes. You stop at the edge of a gap where the road used to be. You get out and look down 150 feet at crushed vehicles and bodies. That's the horror of engineering failure, not some distant industrial accident, not something that happens to other people in other places. A bridge you've driven across hundreds of times suddenly killing you during your morning commute. Now here's what makes this even more terrifying. Autostrade per l'Italia, the company operating the bridge, had engineering reports explicitly warning that collapse was possible. They had been warned. They chose not to act immediately because shutting down the bridge for repairs would be expensive and inconvenient. 43 people died because someone decided traffic convenience was more important than structural safety. And that decision-maker never faced criminal charges. The company eventually settled with victims' families, but the person who decided to delay repairs despite warnings walked free. That pattern continues through the next 4 disasters, each one more horrifying than the last. Each one completely preventable. Each one resulting in essentially zero accountability for decision-makers. April 24, 2013, 8:41 a.m. The Rana Plaza building in Savar, Bangladesh, an 8-story garment factory complex, collapsed in 90 seconds. 1,134 people died. 2,500 were injured. But the true horror wasn't the death toll, it was how people died. The day before the collapse, massive cracks appeared in the building's walls. Engineers inspected the structure and declared it unsafe. Police ordered the building evacuated and closed. The building owner, Sohel Rana, threatened workers, "Report to work tomorrow or you're fired." Workers needed the money. They reported. The next morning, as thousands of workers operated sewing machines on upper floors, the building collapsed. But unlike the Morandi Bridge, which killed most victims instantly, the Rana Plaza collapse created a compressed debris field with thousands of void spaces where people were trapped alive. The collapse compressed 8 stories into approximately 20 feet of tangled concrete, steel, and machinery. Thousands of people were trapped in small spaces throughout this debris field. Many were injured, most couldn't move. All could hear voices around them, other trapped workers calling for help, rescuers working above, the sounds of cutting equipment and jackhammers, and they waited, some for hours, some for days. Rescue workers described hearing voices from deep in the debris field that they couldn't reach. They'd talk to trapped victims, promising rescue was coming, but often unable to reach them for 12, 24, or even 48 hours. During that time, victims had to remain conscious, aware they were trapped, listening to other trapped workers die around them. Rishma Begum was trapped in the rubble for 17 days. 17 days in complete darkness, unable to move, with minimal water and no food. She survived by rationing rainwater that dripped through the debris. She was conscious the entire time. Imagine 17 days trapped in a space so small you can't stretch, listening to rescuers working somewhere above you but unable to signal them, wondering if today will be the day you die of dehydration. Many victims weren't as fortunate as Rashma. Rescue workers found bodies positioned in ways that suggested they'd died slowly. Hands reaching toward voices they could hear. Bodies positioned trying to crawl toward sounds of rescue. Some died with their arms extended toward gaps in the debris that were inches too small to escape through. The most horrific discoveries were the clusters, groups of workers who'd been trapped together. Rescuers found rooms where 15 or 20 workers had been trapped as a group. They could talk to each other. They knew they were dying together. And over hours or days, they died one by one while the survivors watched. One survivor, interviewed months later, described being trapped next to a coworker who'd been crushed from the waist down. The coworker was conscious and talking for approximately 6 hours, then became delirious, then stopped responding. The survivor was trapped next to the body for another 12 hours before rescue. Multiple survivors reported that the worst part wasn't the physical pain or fear of death. It was the waiting. Being conscious, aware, hearing rescue efforts happening somewhere nearby, but not knowing if they'd reach you before you died of dehydration, suffocation, or untreated injuries. July 17, 1981, 7:05 p.m. The Hyatt Regency Hotel in Kansas City, Missouri, was hosting a tea dance in its atrium. Approximately 1,600 people were in the atrium, some dancing on the lobby floor, others standing on two suspended walkways that crossed the atrium at the second and fourth floor levels. At 7:05 p.m., both walkways collapsed simultaneously, falling onto the crowded lobby below. 114 people died. Over 200 were injured. The Hyatt Regency atrium was an architectural showpiece, a massive open space rising 4 stories with 2 suspended walkways crossing it at different levels. The walkways were designed to be supported by steel rods running from the ceiling through both walkways, but during construction a design change was made. Instead of one continuous rod supporting both walkways, each walkway was supported independently. This seemingly minor change doubled the load on the upper walkway's connections. Engineering analysis, done after the collapse, showed that the modified design was loaded at nearly twice its rated capacity even with no people on the walkways. Adding people guaranteed failure was only a matter of time. The walkways had been in place for less than a year when they collapsed. They'd been crowded before, but on the night of July 17th, during the tea dance, approximately 40 people were standing on the 4th floor walkway and 20 on the 2nd floor walkway when the upper walkway's connections failed. The 4th floor walkway dropped 30 feet onto the 2nd floor walkway, which was directly below it. The combined weight of both walkways plus all the people on them then fell an additional 20 feet onto the lobby floor, which was packed with dancers. Survivors describe a sound like an explosion, then a massive crash, then screaming, then a moment of shocked silence as people processed what had happened, then chaos as survivors realized the lobby floor was covered with bodies, debris, and 2 collapsed walkways. But here's the horror. Many victims didn't die instantly. The collapsed walkways created a debris field on the lobby floor where people were crushed but not killed immediately. Rescuers arriving on scene found victims trapped under concrete and steel, conscious, screaming for help. Dr. Joseph Wiekerl, one of the first emergency room doctors to arrive, described it as the worst disaster scene I've ever witnessed. People trapped and crushed, begging for help, and we couldn't reach them. We needed specialized equipment to lift the debris, but people were dying while we waited for it to arrive. One victim, later identified as 23-year-old Sarah Henderson, was trapped under a section of walkway that had pinned her legs. She was conscious and talking to rescuers for over an hour while they worked to free her. When they finally lifted the debris, catastrophic bleeding from her crushed legs caused her to go into shock. She died minutes later despite immediate medical attention. The psychological trauma on survivors was immense. Many people on the lobby floor weren't injured by the collapse but witnessed friends and family crushed right next to them. One survivor described holding his wife's hand while she died, unable to move because he was pinned under debris that didn't weigh enough to crush him but prevented him from helping her. Another horror element, many of the dead were couples who'd been dancing together. Rescuers found numerous couples crushed together, some still holding hands. The survivors who'd lost partners described the nightmare of seeing them right there, just feet away, dying while they watched helplessly. June 5, 1976, 11:57 a.m. The Teton Dam in Idaho, a newly constructed earthen dam holding approximately 356,000 acre-feet of water, began to fail. Workers at the dam noticed a small leak at approximately 7 a.m. By 11 a.m., the leak had become a visible flow. By 11:57 a.m., the dam failed catastrophically, releasing billions of gallons of water that swept away entire towns. 14 people died, a relatively low death toll because the dam was in a sparsely populated area and the failure took hours, allowing some evacuation. But the horror factor is extreme because of how victims died and what survivors witnessed. Unlike sudden failures like bridge collapses, the Teton Dam failure was visible from miles away. People in towns downstream could see the wall of water approaching. They had time to realize they were going to die. And they had no way to escape because the water was moving faster than they could run or drive. Survivors describe watching the flood approach, a wall of brown water 30 feet high carrying houses, cars, trees, and debris moving at approximately 15 miles per hour. People tried to drive away, but roads were clogged with traffic. They tried to run to high ground, but the valley was flat. They climbed onto roofs, which the flood then swept away. One survivor, interviewed decades later, described climbing a power pole as the water rose around him. He watched families in vehicles swept past, people visible in the windows, alive, aware, unable to escape as their cars tumbled in the current. He watched a woman holding a child climb onto the roof of her floating house, then watched the house disintegrate in the current, throwing them both into the water where they disappeared. The horror of Teton Dam isn't just how people died, drowning, being crushed by debris, being swept miles downstream and battered to death. It's that they had time to know it was coming and couldn't escape. March 10, 1906. The Courrières coal mine in northern France, the largest mine in Europe, exploded due to coal dust ignition. The explosion killed approximately 200 miners instantly, but 1,100 more were trapped underground in various sections of the mine, cut off from the surface by collapsed tunnels and toxic gas. The horror of Courrières is unmatched because of how trapped miners died, slowly in complete darkness over days or weeks, knowing rescue was impossible. When the explosion occurred, it destroyed the main shafts and filled the mine with carbon monoxide. Miners in deep sections were trapped with no way to signal the surface, no light sources once their lamps ran out, no food and no water except contaminated groundwater. Rescue efforts began immediately but faced impossible conditions. The main shafts were collapsed. Carbon monoxide concentrations were lethal. Rescue teams couldn't descend without risking their own lives. They attempted to dig alternative access shafts, but the mine was so deep that digging new shafts would take weeks. Meanwhile, underground, trapped miners faced a horror beyond imagination. Complete darkness once their lamps exhausted their fuel, no communication with the surface, no way to know if rescue was coming or if they'd been abandoned, and the slow realization that they were going to die down there. Some miners wrote letters to their families using chalk or coal dust on tunnel walls or on scraps of paper they carried. These letters were discovered weeks later when rescue teams finally reached the deep sections. The letters documented their final days, initial hope that rescue would come quickly, growing despair as time passed, final acceptance of death, messages to wives and children, apologies, expressions of love, and in some cases descriptions of watching fellow miners die one by one. One letter written by a miner named Auguste Burton was found with his body 3 weeks after the explosion. April 1st, we are 23 men in this section. The air is bad. We can barely breathe. We hear nothing from above. We do not know if they are coming. The darkness is complete. We cannot see each other. We only know who lives by their voice when they speak. Pierre died today. We put his body in a side tunnel. April 3rd. Now we are 19. 4 more died in the night. The air grows worse. We are too weak to move. I write this so you will know we were thinking of you. Tell Marie I love her. Tell my son to be strong. We tried to survive. God forgive us. Auguste's body was found with those of 11 other miners who had died over a period of approximately 5 days in that section of the mine. They had survived the initial explosion only to suffocate slowly in the darkness, conscious, aware, writing final messages they hoped would be found. Rescue teams eventually reached various sections of the mine over a period of weeks. They found bodies everywhere. Most had died from carbon monoxide poisoning within hours of the explosion. But some sections had been sealed off from the gas and had breathable air. In those sections, miners had survived for days or even weeks before dying of dehydration, starvation, or despair-induced suicide. Several miners were found with self-inflicted wounds, having chosen quick death over slow dying in darkness. The final death toll reached 1,099 miners. It remains the deadliest mining disaster in European history. But the true horror wasn't the number. It was the manner of death, trapped in complete darkness, slowly suffocating or starving, writing goodbye letters that might never be found, listening to fellow miners die one by one, knowing rescue wasn't coming fast enough. The rankings explained. Number 5, Morandi Bridge 43 deaths. Horror factor, sudden death during normal activity, dashcam evidence of final moments, survivors stopping at edge of void. Number 4, Rana Plaza 1,134 deaths. Horror factor, trapped alive for days, conscious dying, waiting for rescue that came too late or not at all. Number 3, Hyatt Regency 114 deaths. Horror factor, crushed while conscious, survivors watching friends die, couples dying together while holding hands. Number 2, Teton Dam 14 deaths. Horror factor, watching death approach, no escape possible, awareness of impending drowning, time to process that you're about to die. Number 1, Courrier's Mine 1,099 deaths. Horror factor, dying over weeks in complete darkness, starvation and suffocation combined, writing goodbye letters while slowly dying, longest suffering of any disaster. The commonality across all 5, every disaster was predicted. Engineers calculated the exact failure modes. Warnings were filed, and decision-makers chose not to act because prevention cost money and disasters were only probable, not certain. The Morandi Bridge engineers warned of collapse. The Rana Plaza engineers declared it unsafe the day before. The Hyatt Regency design change was obviously dangerous to any qualified engineer. The Teton Dam showed visible failure signs for days. The Courrier's Mine had had smaller explosions, warning of coal dust problems. In every case, someone with authority knew the disaster would occur and chose not to prevent it. And in every case except Rana Plaza, those decision-makers faced no criminal charges. They paid fines, lost licenses, or resigned, but walked free despite body counts in the hundreds or thousands. The horror isn't just how people died. It's that they died because someone calculated that their lives were worth less than the cost of proper engineering. Now you know the 5 most horrific engineering failures ranked by how people died. Not quick, not painless, but slowly, consciously aware they were dying because someone cut a corner. Morandi Bridge dashcam footage of final moments. Rana Plaza trapped alive for days. Hyatt Regency crushed while conscious. Teton Dam watching death approach. Courrier's Mine dying in darkness over weeks. 2,304 total deaths across these 5 disasters. Every single one predicted. Every single one preventable. Almost zero criminal accountability for decision makers. You can research infrastructure safety in your area. You can demand criminal liability for executives whose cost-cutting kills people. You can refuse to accept accident as explanation for predicted disasters. Which horror factor disturbed you most? Sudden death with no warning or prolonged dying while conscious? Comment below. Subscribe for more engineering disaster investigations. These 2,000 people died knowing someone could have saved them. Don't let them be forgotten.